So we get to finally talk about the Nintendo 3DS. And this was one of those particular consoles that when it first came out, I was kind of intrigued by, but I wasn't thinking it was that big of a difference from the Nintendo DS that I had, or even the DSi. But over time, this console has definitely grown to be a very, very good console for me. I've played a lot more games on the Nintendo 3DS within the last 2 years than I've ever played before. And I will definitely tell you, the Nintendo 3DS, the Nintendo DSi, the Nintendo DS, the whole entire DS lineup are some of my most favorite and most impactful game consoles of all time. And I love these so much. And the answer will always be yes, buy Nintendo 3DS. But I think this year is a little bit different. And the reason for that is because these 3DSs and these consoles in general have just been getting more and more expensive in the used market. So if you're going to buy them, I would definitely say go buy them. They're really good, but they are getting more pricier. And it is kind of the unfortunate thing. But at the same time, these things are just so readily available as well. So it's kind of hard not to go and pick one up. But when you take a look at this console and kind of what it brought, this console came out originally many, many years ago, back in 2011. So this year will actually be turning 14 years old in 2025. So that was kind of a pretty crazy thing. And for those of you who don't remember, this console was basically superseding or being the successor to the Nintendo DSi. The main competitor of this console was the PlayStation Vita. And luckily or unluckily, depending on which way you sat in, at that time, the Nintendo 3DS was pretty much the obvious winner in that lineup. And it was kind of the console that was keeping Nintendo afloat for many, years at that point, because, Nintendo wasn't doing really that well with the Nintendo Wii U. So they had to go through and kind of pump the Nintendo 3DS a little bit more, because that was the console that was kind of giving them a little bit more funding. And that was the one that was quote unquote successful rather than the Nintendo Wii U, which they were hoping to be the Nintendo, Wii type of success. Now with the 3DS in itself, this console is giving you those two screens. So the top screen, which is a little bit bigger than the bottom screen. And when you take a look at the original Nintendo 3DS, which is the one I have, this type of console is very, very interesting because the biggest kind of selling point or the biggest thing they would kind of throw on with this device was that 3D feature. Now, at that time, I thought it was kind of cool. I went to like a Target or something like that back then when these things were still on display, and I would kind of mess around with it. And it was actually a very, very cool thing. It was like a really cool gimmick, but it was kind of just a gimmick for me, right? Even when I eventually bought a Nintendo 3DS not that long ago, it was probably just like 4 years ago or 5 years ago, it wasn't really like that crazy thing, big of a thing for me. Like I very rarely ever turn on the 3D toggle. And if I do, it's usually by accident and then I toggle it off. It just never really sat well in my head. Like I guess it just like messes with my eyes and gives me more of a headache. So that always kind of was a drawback for me, that they really kind of focused in on this 3D feature, because it really was a really good console even without that. But I do understand this console had to have some sort of gimmick, and 3D features at that time back in 2011, that was all the rage. I remember there was this phone called the HTC Evo, I believe what it was called, and that phone also allowed you to do like 3D videos on it. So that 3D TVs were a really big thing. So like it made sense why they did it, but definitely looking back, they've never really even talked about it that much even since then, to be honest. Funny enough though, when you take a look at this console for the rest of the side of it, you do have the joystick on the top left of this console, the D-pad, the ABXY buttons, your home and buttons in the center. And this console still, when I go and pick it up and look at it, it still is like a very good looking console nonetheless. You're still getting your front camera and your back camera, and funny enough, this thing still feels very good too. Like it still feels like a very good hefty console. It doesn't really seem like a super outdated device. It still looks pretty good. And luckily for me, all my 3DSs that I own, which is just two different ones, they all still turn on. They don't have too many issues inside of them either. And I do think that's a really cool thing going on for this type of console if you're kind of looking at it. So I would probably tell you from that side too, at least from the exterior and the body, it still holds up fairly well. But this is where we start getting into the kind of the gaming library of this console. For the duration of the whole entire life of the 3DS, there were so many games that came out for this thing. Number one, it was already backwards compatible with, the Nintendo, DS games and the DSi games. So that in and of itself was a really big thing to kind of keep in mind there too, because if you were going to go through and, pick up your 3DS, well, you were going to have already a massive list of games that you could already play on day one because it was backwards compatible with the Nintendo DS games. But also, for the whole duration of time for the 3DS, there were really, really good games that Nintendo made for these consoles. There were tons of Pokemon games that came out for them, but I'm not really too much into Pokemon. They had Mario Kart 7 that came out for this game, which, for this console, which looked really good. And that was a really big inspiration to Mario Kart 8 as well. You had New Super Mario Bros., the second one, which was really cool. You had a brand new Animal Crossing's New Leaf, which a lot of people say is one of the best ones. Super Mario 3D Land also came out for this. And then you had Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS. The fact that this console had a Super Smash game inside of it in general was crazy, because this was, I believe, the first time that we got a Super Smash Bros. Game for our 3DS. So for any portable gaming console. So that right there was another super crazy thing that we had going on there too. There was also the Luigi's Mansion that came out for this console, 2 remakes of The Legend of Zelda, and then you also had The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. And I ended up playing that game, and I absolutely loved that game so much. The Legend of Zelda: Link Between Worlds was so cool. And it's funny because when you're playing these 3D exclusive games, like these 3DS exclusive games, you can just kind of tell where Nintendo wanted it, like how much they were really trying to focus in on these game developers to really utilize those 3D features. For me personally, like I said, I very rarely ever had it on, but you could just tell even when you're playing the game how Nintendo kind of wanted to go and, kind of incorporate those 3D features and what they expected. So I do think it was kind of cool, but it was more of a novelty. But then when you actually take a look forward, right? So you look past the 3DS lineup, because this console was supported for quite a bit of time after the Wii U. Nintendo had to keep kind of pumping this thing out because they didn't really have any other things to kind of, sell. And this thing was officially discontinued in 2020. So this thing had about a 9-year run cycle, which was kind of crazy in and of itself. But when you take a look at the Nintendo 3DS, the biggest thing to keep in mind here is that this was a really big inspiration as well to the Nintendo Switch. This thing was kind of the thing that was keeping the Nintendo afloat, so to speak, until they went through and they were able to fund the Nintendo Switch project. Now, when the Nintendo Switch came out, I was still hearing that Nintendo was going to keep the 3DS laying around. They were still going to keep that phone, that it was not going to discontinue it. But guess what? Because the Nintendo Switch was so impactful, they decided to go through and basically still continue to sell the Nintendo, they ended up, basically discontinuing the 3DS and focusing in on the Switch. And notice that I told you that the, 3DS was discontinued in 2020. I do think Nintendo saw the writing on the wall. They were like, well, this thing is the Switch is selling like crazy. We don't need to go and have 2 different types of consoles still selling there, right? They could just go through and just sell the Switch. So I think that's one thing to kind of keep in mind with the 3DS as well, that there was a chance Nintendo was going to still continue supporting the 3DS because it was that good of a console and people were buying it. But they took a gamble on the Switch, it worked out, and ended up doing really well for themselves. So overall, taking a look at the Nintendo 3DS, I think this console is still worth buying. And I think the games behind this console are still worth buying as well. This is still a very good type of device. I would still recommend a lot of people to go and buy it. But keep in mind, this is a little bit of it's a little bit more of an expensive console in the used market. It does cost a little bit more money, which can be kind of a downside depending on who you are. It may not be the biggest deal in the world, but that could be one thing that you might end up running into. But otherwise, I love the 3DS. I love the games that this console had. And that's kind of how I see this console holding up in 2025. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.